So this is my attempt to explain how you get from the extract to the essay plan using the extract from February-March 2024, which was the Term 2 exam in 2025. And you got a reminder on the right-hand side of the process that you need to follow. You need to read the extract, identify the 5 W's, think about names, verbs, and nominalization. Reread the extract and summarize the key points on a second piece of paper alongside the extract, and then try to distill your own summaries down to the 2 main points. This is what Cambridge called the big message, where the first part is probably about the Holocaust and the second part is probably adding something, qualifying something, limiting or adding detail to the first part of the big message or the main message. Then the tricky bit is how to organize all of that into a form that you can write an essay about. So that's the function, that's the purpose of this this video. So here's the extract, taking a photo of it just to remind you, and you can freeze the video and remind yourself what it said. We're going to read through the extract, but I'm going to assume that you can do that without me reading it to you and identify the 5 W's. Now, in this case, the 5 W's are quite helpful, but perhaps some people might miss it. So the 5 W's, what is it about? It's about Hitler, his speeches, his words, his decision-making, his thinking, his intentions, critically, and whether he was related to the Holocaust or not. And hopefully you'll all spot that he was quite closely related to the Holocaust. It really is a causation extract rather than anything else. And it's typical of an intentionalist causation extract because of the obsession with the dates. When was the decision taken and who took it? Well, there's no consideration of anyone other than Hitler, so it's obvious that Hitler's the one who took the decision, but there's lots of references to dates and lots of consideration of what he was thinking and what he was saying at different times. So it's Hitler always doing the doing, saying the saying, or in some cases not saying quite what he meant, but still meaning it. So next step is to look through the extract, create your own summary, and you can see on the right there, that's my summary created alongside the extract, more or less lined up, so you can see where those ideas come from. And hopefully this is a helpful step. Those are the key points, the key summary points from the extract. And as you can see, there's lots of them, but it doesn't look very much like an essay. It really just looks like the extract written out. This is what Cambridge would call describing the extract. So we haven't gone far enough if this is all we do. You actually need to figure out what the key ideas are. So there's the same points, but just color-coded to show what the main ideas are. So that you've got one red idea, one dark blue idea, and then if you want a third one, you've got a light blue idea as well. So how do you turn this into the main message? Well, you distill it down. You distill the red points down, and the red points, and you can rewind the video if you need to check, the red points really say that Hitler intended for the Holocaust to happen. He wanted the extermination of the Jews, and therefore he is responsible for the Holocaust. He's the reason why it happened, and he's stating it as his objective more or less explicitly from 1924 onwards. The second part of the big message is that there were periods when he couldn't directly state his goal of extermination. And there are some practical political reasons why he's not able to do this at all times. And then the third part, if you want a third part, is that there's really a reference to other historians and how wrong they are, because the historian here is saying anyone who thinks that Hitler wasn't involved is not the prime mover, and anyone who thinks that the decision was taken after 1939, they're all misguided, which is a polite way of saying wrong. Now, this is a part which many people skip or miss out. So I want to just dwell on this to emphasize it. So we've got the first part of our big message at the top. It hasn't changed. Hitler wanted to rid Europe of the Jews. And he's saying that as early as 1924. He's the reason for the Holocaust. That's the big high-level summary, but actually it's made up of some sub-points. Cambridge call these sub-messages. So the sub-messages are set out below, and these are this is my organization, but I'm calling part 1A, he wanted to destroy the Jews. He wanted to rid Europe of the Jews. And he wanted that pretty consistently. He decided on that quite early on. Part 1B, I'm saying he didn't always openly state it. In fact, what the historian thinks is that he didn't actually openly state it until 1936. That's lines 1 and 2 in the extract. And even in the years 1936 to 1939, he's still being ambiguous at times. He's still not being totally open, even up to 1939. Nevertheless, and this is part C, it's still beyond doubt that that was what he wanted. He had taken that decision, at least by 1939. So even if you think that his statements from 1937, 1938, and the historian lists some examples of those words, those speeches, even if you think that he is perhaps, even if you think that that evidence doesn't prove that he's speaking openly and not speaking ambiguously, it does still prove that he had made that decision. And overlooking the evidence is wrong, according to this historian. Part 2 of the big message, still the same. The summary is, he couldn't directly state it. And this is why it's related to part 1. So part 1 said that he wanted the extermination of the Jews, and he's saying it more or less consistently from 1924. The second part is he's not always expressing it clearly, explicitly, openly, and there's some reasons why that was the case. In other words, just because he's not saying it doesn't mean he doesn't mean it. He still means it and wants it, but he's being careful about the words that he uses because being more open would have been a political error. So 2A, his ideas were essentially just dreams before 1933, because before he's in power, there's no way he was going to be able to achieve those things. But after 1933, it started to become more like a possibility. But even, and this is part B, even after he's in power, he still had to take his time and be careful. That's not to say that he didn't stop attacking the Jews, and the extract talks about the attacks, but it just means that he's got to be careful how he does it. And the reason why he's got to be so careful about how he does it is because he's not yet securely in power enough. And part C, there's uncertainty about public support. There's evidence even in 1938 that public support was not in favor of something as extreme as extermination. And the evidence is from Kristallnacht. So he could not directly state what he was going to do. But that doesn't mean he hadn't decided, and it doesn't mean that he didn't want to do it. But he needs to preserve domestic unity, and he needs to protect Germany from the possibility of an aggression from foreign countries. But what he does realize by the later 1930s is that he can achieve what he wants as long as he's got the cover of a war going on at the same time. So he starts starts planning for mass murder and war at the same time. So those are the 7 parts of the main message. We could summarize it in just 2 parts, but actually if we want to cover the whole thing, we really need to mention all 7. And this, I think, is how the mark scheme works. If you're aiming for level 6 or top end of level 5, you've really got to cover the majority of these 7 points. If you only cover the 2 high-level summary points and essentially just repeat those 2 high-level summaries over and over again without really getting into the details of parts A, B, C, and then for D for part 2, then you're not really showing a complete understanding of the extract. You might be showing a level 5 sound understanding of the extract, but it's not complete because you're not getting into sufficient detail. So make sure that you are covering these points. Now, how do you cover them? I would suggest that this order is the logical order. If you don't cover them in this order, I don't think it matters, but I think cover them in a logical order if you can. Now, of course, the extract merges all of these points together and sort of jumps around between these points. But our job is to try to separate them out and explain them in a logical fashion to show that we're not just copying the extract, we are interpreting, analyzing, and explaining the extract. So that, I think, is the logical way to do it. You can see the light blue point there fits in, but I don't think it's part of the main message. And so you can find a way to incorporate it. You could also have that as a final paragraph at the end as a kind of conclusion, but I don't think it's a key part of the extract. So that more or less looks like an essay plan. Now, I don't think you should do 7 paragraphs. I think you should probably still stick with 2 main halves of the essay. But how many paragraphs you do, I don't think it really matters. But 7 would probably be, your paragraphs would end up being quite short and the extract might be quite disjointed. So you might just do 2 big mega paragraphs, or you might do a different combination. I don't think it really matters, as I said. So your introduction should start with the 5 W's, and you should finish the introduction by clearly stating both parts of the big message if you can. But if you can't, remember, you can always come back to it in the form of a conclusion, but you're going to need to be able to state both parts of the big message in your main body paragraphs anyway. So spend a bit of time figuring it out and incorporate it into your introduction if you possibly can. Then one final reminder, when you actually end up writing your essay, remember that you're writing about the historian. You're not writing about Hitler and the Holocaust. So this is not your interpretation. You don't have to argue these points. You are writing about what the historian argues. So make sure that as many of your sentences as possible begin with the historian, or the historian's argument, or the historian's evidence. I hope that helps.